to make themselves
Perfect.
comfortable and introduce yourselves.
All right.
Please.
So I'm Jason Lambert, as Leo said. I work for AB InBev, which is a company who owns over 400 brands of beer. Very exciting. So Budweiser, Bud Light, Stella Artois, Corona globally, and Brahma and Skol for the Brazilians in the room.
I'm Bärí Williams. Currently, I'm at a fintech company called Marqeta, and prior to that, I was at Stubhub, and prior to that, I was at Facebook. And I also advise a couple of startups, Owl, Blavity, and another called Cool Cousin.
So we have a very large corporation with hundreds of years on their shoulders, and we have...
I'm 25.
And we have a much younger one.
I didn't know I was going that gray.
And so first, some house rules. So we want to disagree as much as possible. I know that can be very boring to sit listening to panels where everybody agrees with everything. Let's see. We're going to try. And you please keep us honest. So the theme is the Lean Digital Revolution, right? How many of you have been to our lounge there? Great. And I see that as the booth comes in, more and more people visit the lounge. But the question that I got the most while I was there was, what the heck is Lean Digital? And what the heck is Lean Digital Speedway? What's the meaning? What's the relationship between these three things, right? So we're going to explore this in this panel. But first, I'd like to start with something. Why do you think that speed is important for businesses nowadays?
Because the technology changes so quickly. I would say just having been immersed in tech for the last 5 years, primarily, if you're not kind of shipping product, then you're going to die on the vine. And so particularly seeing this at scale at Facebook, where you have so many different groups working on different projects, we kind of took the attitude that if you're going to fail, fail fast, so that you kind of get it out of the way. And if there has to be another iteration of a project or something you're doing, you get to it quickly. So the idea of going fast is really so that you're not left behind, and also so you're first to market, and also so you're not kind of deregulated out of a space as well.
Yeah, I'd say for us, it's more like, keeping the customer at the center of everything we do, keeping the consumer at the center of everything we do. And so how do we create that feedback loop to understand what their wants and their needs are? And for us in like a traditional CPG, that's obviously like, what are they drinking? What are they eating? Where are they doing these things? So as technology changes, as sort of the world is changing around us, how do we continue to put new product out to continue to sort of elevate that feedback loop to understand them at a deeper level?
All right, so I beg to disagree. I think that's nothing like that. Actually, I believe that the reason speed is important is that it's the only way to learn and then be able to understand the customer and then be able to ship the right products, right? So that's our belief. It's really learning in rapid cycles. Let's try to explore a little bit the relationship between these words, right? Lean, digital, speed. Lean has been used in many different contexts. There's Lean Six Sigma, there's Lean Startups, there is Lean Analytics, there is Lean UX, there is Lean Food, there is Lean as in, well, we want to reduce costs, right? So what is your understanding of Lean?
For us, I think it's more, like, again, coming from like a true sort of product creation, supply chain company is like, man, we are so good at applying like Kaizen and all these lean principles to manufacturing, and then we come over to the digital space and we're terrible at it. And like, so how do we sort of apply those same principles of like constantly understanding what we're trying to do, measuring sort of those outputs, and then continuing to improve on those?
I know you don't want me to agree, but I do. I think I would add another layer to that is also, how are you measuring? What are your benchmarks for success? So the first thing I think of when I think of Lean is if it's word association for me, it's metrics. The first thing I'm thinking about is, how are you allocating resources? Do you need to reallocate or put additional resources on something in order to make it more successful? What does success look like? What are the KPIs for that? So when I think of Lean, it's efficiency, its ability to scale, and its speed. but how do you do that in the most cost-effective manner possible? So to me, it kind of all distills down to your benchmarks and your data and your KPIs.
So being data-driven.
Yes, always.
Great. And there seems to be no disagreement that speed is important. Everybody talks about that. Why large enterprises still struggle in being faster?
Because they're large. Like, I mean, really, that's the answer. At least what I've seen is that when you're working in a large organization, oftentimes it takes, like 50, 11 people to sign off on one change. You have to find like this one person in that one department to okay a change in a code, or you have to find this one person in one department to okay that yes, you can do this according to accounts payable or something. And so when you're dealing with people who are used to working in silos or they have their own process to get through something, it may not be cohesive or conducive to working with your process. So it's figuring out how do you collaborate, and it's harder to do that in large organizations just because they tend to be so they're not as nimble.
I would disagree with you on this one. That like, man, nobody wants to be slow, right? Like it's not like our executive team's sitting back and is like, we should come up with a mobile app and it should take us 18 months to deliver it. I think the idea is like, sort of like a business is constructed in like a sort of digital native era, and then there's all of these other things that you need to transform and transition over. And to do that, it has a need to create like new processes, like new verticals within the organization. And that sort of creates, and I know we're going to talk about culture in a little bit, but like from the top all the way down, people have to have the appetite to change and then bring in the right profiles to sort of execute that change.
All right, so, and you mentioned, well, they're slow because they're large. Is there any hope? Can this be changed?
Yeah, to his point, I think if you reorganize or optimize the way the organization is structured, you can definitely set it up for speed and execution. But I think oftentimes people are, in larger corporations, they tend to have a more rigid mindset in terms of how a company should be structured, like accounting sits with accounting and legals with legal and products with product. Whereas if you're working on a specific product, maybe you have one person from each of those different teams supporting that one project or one product. And of course, they're going to be faster because they're all working together.
All right, so there are the silos and the optimization within each one of those silos, which you mentioned before, right? And there's this need for multidisciplinary teams. And one of the concepts of Lean is the value stream, right? From beginning to end, from idea to having a product in the hands of the customer and everything that happens in between. How can that concept help us reorganize our corporations?
I think probably an example I would give about that is when I worked at Facebook, and at Facebook, I was in legal supporting the Connectivity Labs Internet.org group. So we're building drones, lasers, and satellites. And oftentimes people look at legal as the place where things go to die. Like legal is not where you go for speed. Unless you're going to work with me, then you're going to be fast.
Who doesn't love to work with lawyers? Come on.
We're really nice people. But no, but having the ability to sit in the room with the engineers, with the supply chain managers, with our business people who were figuring out how would we actually use this drone once it's created. From ideation to implementation, we actually went faster because there's a lot of IP involved. There are a lot of data issues, privacy issues, airspace law, all kinds of random things that an engineering group sitting by themselves would not have thought of. So in order to optimize for that, it's important to have all of the people that are going to be supporting you in that system in the room from the very beginning. And that way you can optimize for speed because everyone's working with the same information at the same time.
Yeah, for us it's more, 100%. I'm going to answer actually your last question and this one with the same sort of answer. It's like, yes, there's hope. My hope is sitting in this room with our team here. The idea, though, is like, and you're bringing in new profiles into the organization, right? So you're talking about like product, data, engineering, legal, and like what roles like these other or these sort of similar verticals play in a new organization that they, played in an old one too. And so how do you sort of cohesively come together as one sort of squad or unit and execute? And I know we talked earlier about like, how early do you get legal involved? How early do you get procurement, supply, all these other verticals of your organization involved, and the sooner the better.
Well, I would say it even depends on what it is that you're doing. Because for something like building a drone, yeah, you kind of want legal there from the first conversation. It would have been bad if they brought me in at the end when they had already built this thing and they just wanted to test fly. So it's depending on what it is that you're working with. Sometimes yes and sometimes no.
But just picking up on that example, so legal and certainly other functions as well, were involved since the beginning, and then worked throughout the process, and that lead time actually shrunk by a good amount. So, you certainly had other examples where legal was not involved since the beginning.
Yes.
And was it by chance, or what was different between these?
By chance that legal wasn't involved? Probably not. But by complete circumstance and necessity, legal was involved at the end. Because if you have people who don't know necessarily what it is that they're doing, but they might know enough to be dangerous, and you start playing with IP rights and supply chain and manufacturing, and all of a sudden, you realize that you're a little bit, out too far in front of your skis. And at the end, when you have to call in and get legal to come back to kind of unravel something that you've done, that actually is just going to elongate your time that much more, because now we have to renegotiate everything that you thought you had done. So I would say in certain cases, if you know that you're dealing with something that's going to be controversial, and off the top, that's always going to be anything having to do with data, privacy, PII, IP creation, or licensing, I would always say get your lawyer involved first, and not get them involved at the end.
All right. So that basically is a decision in the hands of a leader that will decide then when to involve which areas.
Yes.
Is there a way to bring more clarity to the organization as a whole of who to involve, how to create this multidisciplinary team since the beginning, how to see what's needed?
Sometimes it's a learning process, right? It's like, as long as you're open to sort of that feedback loop and understanding, like, we've tripped over ourselves several times. And because the problem is if you cast the net so wide, especially in large organizations, all of a sudden you have 55 people on your team, none of whom are directly sort of trying to execute what you're trying to do. So it's, learning sort of the old process, migrating over to a new process, and then figuring out who fits into where at what point. And you're gonna trip sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's about guardrails, right? Like I just gave you 4 categories where I think you would want to involve legal. If there's any kind of issue where you're going to create IP, you have some patents that you may need to license, if you have some data privacy issues, or if you're entering into a new market and you may not know what the parameters around data privacy may be in a country, you definitely want to call legal then. But for other things, like if it's general supply chain and procurement, you may not need to involve 2 lawyers sitting in that meeting. So it really is going to depend on the complexity of what it is you're doing.
All right. So let's pivot to another topic here. So there's this concept that many years ago became popular with the Lean startup movement. And nowadays, we had in the previous panel a reference about the Startup Way, the new book from Eric Ries, which basically preaches those techniques applied to large enterprise. So, and certainly there's a big hype around this. Do you think it works? Do you think it's applicable to a large enterprise?
I mean, for us, I think everything within AB InBev stems from 3 things. It's dream people culture. And if you bring people in, I feel like with the disruptive mindset is actually just a complete change of process and complete change of how you execute your business. And so for us, it's man, set that as a huge dream, bring in really talented people to do it and to own it, and then, drive forward and do the right things. So I don't think there's, for us, there's been no magic formula of I read Eric's book and we plucked it into AB InBev and we solved the world's problems.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of it stems from whatever your company culture is. And a large part of that, at least to me, the way that I always look at scaling an organization is people first. The right people will make the right processes, and that will yield the right products. And if you think about that in a backward manner, you will keep people who may not be good for your organization longer than you should, and that may force other good people out because they're not comfortable. And that shows that there's no recourse to be a bad person inside of a company. I think we've seen examples of that in other companies in the last year or so. So I think there's no necessarily a magic formula, but I think if you're building your culture and your product with a people first mindset and making sure that you have the right folks involved, that they have the right use cases, they're creative, they're intelligent, they're capable, and they're transparent. I think transparency is a huge win for a company if you can have that feedback loop. But that means that you have to hire people who are comfortable giving that feedback and also people who are receptive to it.
All right. And just based on what you just said, I see all this practices or advice that you can find in such methodologies like the Lean Startup movement. It's very focused on the customer development or the product development. Mm-hmm. And while that might be the most important thing for a startup, for a large corporation, there are many other things that I see missing and sometimes this is taken as a silver bullet that can solve the innovation problem and can solve the cultural problems of a large enterprise. But I don't think that that's going to change a company with 100,000 employees or whatever is the number that you have there. And the people aspect is something that is missing. So people like to talk about digital transformation, not so much more nowadays because everybody got tired of that. But transformation means change, right? And implies deep change and change of behaviors. So what can you tell us about that? How to change behavior in a corporation that has been used to work in certain ways for a long time?
You have to incentivize people. Like you have to give people a reason to care about something. I was just talking on a previous panel, and I feel like I've had this conversation for the last year, particularly around Me Too and diversity and a bunch of things. People keep asking, well, how do you actually have systemic change? And I think you have to tie it to metrics. Like if you're not tying something that someone cares about to some certain outcome, they're not going to drive toward it. So for some people, it may be money. For some people, it may be intrinsic motivation. Whatever that thing is that moves the needle in your organization is what you're going to have to use as the carrot to dangle.
For us, everything comes from the top. It's like top-down sort of buy-in. You know, it's like if there's no appetite to do it, it's just not going to happen because it's just impossible. Like there's too much inertia across 9 zones, 6 continents, you know, all of these things. So it's, you know, sort of hooking into that huge appetite from our executive team, from our board of directors, and starting to show some like early and quick wins around like, you know, what are we doing to empower our customers? What are we doing to empower our consumers? What are we doing to improve their experiences, not only with our products, but like really with our company, like how they interact with the company. And then you start building like this groundswell of support within the company around you. And then it just becomes this, you know, huge sort of program that actually, you know, provides its own inertia forward.
I would say I've seen other things. I've seen them both in Stubhub and eBay, and I've seen them at Facebook, and I've even seen a couple of them just at Marqeta. And it's having something bubble up. And the reason being is that at the executive level, people are often so far removed from what the tactical work looks like and what it is it takes in order to get something done that they trust you. If you have a culture of trust, you will trust people that are doing that tactical work to create a plan or come up with an idea. And I've also seen it work when you have an executive team kind of dictate an idea that they want, but they're so far removed from doing the work that they don't have a really good conceptual grasp of how long something will really take, how many resources should be allocated towards it, and how much money it will make because they're not in the weeds.
Right, so you touched on another concept of Lean that I believe is very important, which is go and see where the work gets done, right? And there's always a Japanese word for that, that's genchi genbutsu, and in the Lean vernacular. I do think that this is something that is not well known nowadays because Lean has been used in so many different contexts and narrow contexts that people in general lose sight of what Lean really means in its more complete sense. So there is this idea of going to, from the top levels, right, high executives, going to where the place is where the work gets done, where the value is generated, understanding the customers, right, understanding the factory floor, understanding how the customers are using whatever online ticketing system you have, whatever it is, and bringing the problems to surface with visual management, another concept that exists in Lean, and doing that in cycles of continuous improvement. You mentioned the Kaizens, but doing that consistently, right? So how willing are executives? You mentioned that, well, there has to be this willingness, there has to be this appetite. Let's say the appetite is there, the appetite for change is there. Are top executives really willing to go where the value gets generated, where the work gets done, to understand what it takes to change culture?
I saw it at Stubhub, in the sense that when we had something called last minute services. So if you show up to a Super Bowl or World Series, Final Four, they're on site, set up, handing out tickets for people that come and distribute tickets. Now, as part of that, I had to go and set up the booth at midnight and work the booth the next day. And that's 12 hours on your feet, setting up photo booths, setting up the tickets, understanding how are you keeping a ledger? A lot of it was done in Excel, and I was like, oh my God, this is so ineffective. Like, why are you using this? But nobody would have said that if I hadn't been there to actually see it as head of ops, to say, this is super inefficient. You guys are doing this on an Excel sheet. Like, why don't we have an actual inventory system for this? But it's just something like that where you're in the field, you're getting your hands dirty, and you can make those observations. And so now you have data points, and you have real data points and not necessarily just anecdotes from other people. You've seen it and done it yourself. And everybody did that. So it wasn't just me. The president of the company came and did it for the Super Bowl for a couple hours. So everybody observes to see how can you make a process improvement, and then that gives you the buy-in.
Yeah, we're fortunate enough to have a leadership team who's just crazy about learning, about like understanding what's exists today. Either it's like from new profiles in the company or it's from existing processes. Everybody in our company, from the CEO all the way down to the supply chain people and in the warehouses, goes out into these market visits, and it's like, and how do we sell beer? How do we brew beer? How do we do all of these things? Like, what is the technology behind it? What is the process, the people behind it? And without that, the first time I did it, I was like, man, like we're spending 5-6 hours a day, like every 2 months, going out and doing these things. This is a lot of time, a lot of overhead. But then you start to empathize not only like with who your customers and who your consumers are, but you also start to empathize with like your entire operation, and you start to understand it at a level that like no data point would really tell you. And it's like this is how it's actually being done on the ground. And if we didn't have that, again, from top all the way down to the bottom, they would never have the appetite to do the things that they want to do.
That's also, listening to you say that made me think about, it's a spirit of being humble as well, because oftentimes you have, not every company has leadership that doesn't think something is beneath them. And to have people who are, going out in the field and are handing out tickets at the Super Bowl, you have a leadership team who says, I want to understand how this works, and it's not beneath me to actually go and get my hands dirty and do it.
Were people surprised with this?
Yeah, but the cool thing, at least for me, I learned a lot doing it. I'm sure you've learned a lot being in the field, but for me, the cool part about it was also seeing the customer's reaction. Because you're handing out, tickets to a Super Bowl to someone, and that may be the only time that they'll ever go to a Super Bowl game. It could be the happiest day of their life. And to see how people interact with your product and your service is a really good feeling.
Yeah, for me, it's like, I was surprised, I think, at first, but then this has become the benchmark. Like, I would never work in a company without the same sort of dedication at the leadership level that we have now, only because it's, you see the passion, you see them, like, they are showing up every day to do the right thing by the consumer and the customer, and like, that's what's so interesting about what we're doing.
So I'm going to use that as an example. You probably have worked before in companies that didn't work like that. So can we bring some stories where this didn't happen and generated problems, without mentioning any names, no companies?
Yeah, I left those companies. No, I think, again, it's like, some people in the company set vision, some people sort of look at how to strategize on that vision, and then other people execute. I think, you always have the visionaries and the people at the top are sort of driving that vision, but if they don't understand at least some strategy and execution level, everything breaks down. And so in previous roles, especially like, coming out of college and sort of growing up through my professional career, you're spending a lot of time executing at first, then you start moving into a little bit of strategy. But if you see the leadership level up top without this like excessive appetite to understand the customers, there's a huge break in that chain. And you start driving a strategy, you start pushing execution, and then the vision changes and it doesn't satisfy client need. And then there's just this huge tension within the company that's incredibly unhealthy. And by the way, the product fails, the commercial initiative fails, everything sort of collapses.
Yeah. I would say I've seen both ends of that, in the sense that I've seen leadership that is so disconnected from understanding how the work is actually done. And so you're working with a leadership team that essentially dictates what the goals for the year are going to be, but they have no real idea as to how to execute them. So they have unrealistic timelines, they have unrealistic expectations of the people that are supposed to implement. On the flip side of that, I've also seen people who have a hard time with trust and delegation. And so they're in the minutia and they're in the weeds. And so they're not thinking big picture because they want to tell you how to execute. And it's like, no, you're supposed to be thinking of this stuff up here. And we're supposed to be doing this stuff. And you have people who are trying to do both, and they end up doing both badly. And so the product suffers from that end too.
And you both mentioned how this opportunity to go and see how the work gets done actually puts you in contact with your customer and allowing you to understand the customer and having this customer centricity that we talk so much about. And this has been one hot topic for the past few years, right? Design thinking and bringing the human at the center of everything that we design. We see actually Lean Digital for us is really the crossroads between lean thinking and design thinking. What is for you the importance of design thinking and this design thinking practice in helping companies understand better the customer and move faster as well?
Yeah, for us, I'm not Steve Jobs. I haven't found any Steve Jobs within AB InBev. So it's like to understand like what we need to put out as product, as technology, as sort of a holistic service level. We have to go out and understand our customers and sort of put these, quickly put out some product, understand, get feedback, understand why these things are interesting to them, understand their day-to-day process before even the technology was instrumented, and how sort of new shipments will ultimately impact their business and their life for the better. And only with that can we sort of understand our broader strategy and succeed on that level. A lot of people in AB InBev think they're Steve Jobs, but they're not.
I agree. I know you don't want me to, but I agree. But I also say that I think that it's important to be your own customer. And so what I mean by that is for all of the companies that I work for or work with, I am either a customer or a power user, or it's something that I would use if I could, if it's enterprise. So I look at it from the standpoint of what has my experience been like using it? Is it intuitive? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Are there things I would change about it? What's the interface like? How is the experience? Is it okay? And then look at that, juxtapose it with the competitor. How does the competitor's service or product work? And that's something you could do very easily, especially when you're comparing ticket markets. So it's, how do we make this easier? And that's always how you come back to it. Are we making the customer's experience easier? And if we're not, how can we?
Yeah, I think it also goes back to like your point on like be humble, and it's like be willing to fail and fail fast, or even fail medium or fail long. It's like don't hold on to anything.
Yeah.
Because if you the more you struggle against it, like the more sort of energy you're going to put into it instead of putting it into the right thing.
And Bärí, you were talking about something that happened, I believe, when you started at Stubhub regarding behavior change. Oh, yeah. Can you tell us about that story again?
Was that the "this is the way we've always done it" story? Was that might have been one of them. But Yeah, there was something that I noticed essentially. So I love process. I'm a process nerd, but I only like process to the extent that it makes something faster or more efficient. And I noticed that we were having product delays. Engineers were complaining about being bogged down, and PMs didn't necessarily have a full accounting of the things that their engineering groups were working on. And it turns out that people were stopping engineers in the hallway and asking them, hey, could you build X, Y, and Z? And the engineers would just say yes. But there was no documentation of that. There was no record of it. So when we're trying to figure out why something is behind or allocation of resources, we didn't know that they were also working on this side project that someone asked for. So what that led me to do was create a process which essentially stopped having people have hallway conversations and make requests. And you had to go through a formal process where you had to vet whatever your initiative or new product was. How much money was it going to make us? If it wasn't going to make any money, it couldn't displace something else. And we made sure that we had a representative from each key group. So again, talking about cross-functional work. We had someone from legal, somebody from marketing, somebody from customer service to kind of vet and weigh in and say, hey, this would cost me 3 more people in the customer service department because this would create a certain type of wrinkle that only a human would be able to answer. So it was vetting through how much is something going to cost, how much money is it going to make us, is it worth more of these other things we've prioritized? And if not, then it gets punted or it gets completely thrown out. So that was one way that you kind of stop bad behavior. But you also have to reinforce it because a rule is only as good as the enforcement that goes along with it.
But isn't that bureaucracy that slows down the process?
No, in this case, it made it faster because what you're doing with all those hallway conversations, you have undocumented work going on. And so people are just lagging behind on deadlines for real projects, and we had no way of knowing how that was happening or why. And so with this process, now we have a full accounting. You could see everything everyone was working on. We were able to allocate their time down to, fractions. And that way we understood if there was a delay, we could also chart where the interdependencies were. So if we needed to reallocate somebody else's time in a different department working to support a project, we could.
Right. And so we, in the previous panel, we were talking about actually 2 panels before. We're talking about how long it takes, the lead time for from idea to market. Mm-hmm. And in our experience, that for a large corporation, it's about 2 years. Normally, I don't want to put you on spot, but doing that, how long does it take at ABI?
It's about that.
So how can we shrink that and be more agile?
I think it's not a cultural change, it's a change of mindset. And it's the idea that like you can put something out very quickly that can fail and like the result is a binary option, right? It's like it's either a success or a failure, and to like get that result as quickly as possible is really important. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem even with sort of an elongated timeline to market is that people within the organization tend to like have an emotional connection to what they're putting out now, and then it can't fail. And then like by virtue of the organization sort of building a strategy around it, it doesn't fail only because there's so many people and so much inertia behind it. So I think, cut it down, have everybody have the mindset of like, look, let's put this out. There's a 50-50 shot it should fail. If it fails, great. It's a piece of information that we've now collected that we can go out and try something else that will be much more successful.
Yeah. It's hard to look at something that you've spent years of your life on as a piece of information, though, which is why it is important for people to take the emotion out of it. Yeah. But I also completely understand when people have a hard time divorcing their personal feelings as to whether something fails or not. I would say at Stubhub it took about maybe 9 months, a year, if something was very fast. At Facebook, we built a drone in like 10 months, like a whole drone, and we're test flying it. So it really just depends, I think, on how you structure your teams. And the reason why that the drone project was able to be successful and do it quickly is because we were optimized for speed. I've also been in projects at Facebook where we were sitting in something, in ideation and implementation, and it was shipped on the platform. It was 7 or 8 weeks.
Yeah. So you mentioned 2 years. You mentioned close to 1 year. How can we break that down to smaller chunks that we can learn with in 3 months?
I think like first it depends, I think, on the initiative. Like I'm being unfair, I think, to the organization to say everything is 2 years. But I think we're getting better as an organization to understand, like, how can we pilot something quickly? You know, we're literally in, again, like 6 continents. So can you pick one small country to pilot this in that would make a lot of sense? Can you put something out, sort of an MVP that can grow within that market and understand that? And again, like in a CPG company or an FMCG, it's what are you creating? Are you creating a liquid? Are you creating an app? Are you creating a new sort of supply chain model? So it does depend on like how much you can condense those.
Yeah, I think it again, I would just say it goes back to how you're optimizing your team structures. So the way that we were able to do something in 6 to 8 weeks at Facebook, from sitting in a room from the first conversation to having it on the platform, a lot of it was based on the complexity of the project, to his point. If it's something that's, could be built in platform, it wasn't going to take as long. If you're building an aircraft, yeah, it's going to take a little longer. But even to that point, the fact that we were set up to already have legal ready, we were already set up to have trade and export ready, we were already set up to have, engineers and certain supply chain components already set. That's why it could take 10 months instead of taking, a full 2 years to build and test fly. It's just the team was optimized for speed.
Yeah. So, and a couple of days ago, I've been to a talk where I was really amazed with the application of the MVP concept, because it's a company that was founded in 2014, and now they have the flying car. And they started with a campaign in Indiegogo. So a campaign not for the flying car, actually for a drone that would just take pictures while you were running or doing sports, a drone that follows you, and with a GoPro. They didn't create a camera, anything like that, right? It started with funding of $800,000. That was 6 times more than they were hoping for in their initial campaign. And they went from there all the way to having nowadays the flying car. So with many steps in between. But I think that it's a lot of learning for all of us, because everybody knows this concept, everybody talks about it, but then people get attacked. We have experience. We have stories about so many companies that believe in that, or think that they believe in that, people that believe in that. But then it's so hard to detach from your original idea and really test a concept really quickly. And then, okay, if this works, then we go to the next step, right? And of course, the more time you get invested in something, the harder it is to get detached from it, right? How do we change this culture? It looks like it's so difficult.
Yeah, I think we should also ask if it's applicable. Like for us, I mean, like we are, again, everything's sort of centered around this dream of being the best beer company in the world, and bringing people together. And if we're trying to do that, and if we're trying to build something, digitally that's part of a broader strategy to sort of, attain that dream, we're not going to pivot and build a flying car. Yeah. And actually, our supply team might want a flying car, but like you get the point. So like,
you have flying beer delivery.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be awesome.
But in that instance, like that might be just either okay, this piece of the strategy is a success or a failure, and then you might not have to pivot. Your pivot might just be exit the strategy altogether.
Yeah, I think it's just if you're going to fail, do it quickly. And don't take it personally. I think it's an opportunity to understand and dissect, why didn't this work? And if you do that appropriately, the next thing you go to build, you will be better at that and better for it.
So in our experience working with different corporations, when we put people from different departments, different functions in the same room, and we start to map that process from beginning to end, the value stream from beginning to end, normally people are actually surprised with how long no single person knows actually how long it takes, because everybody's so dedicated to their own function, right? And then looking at these opportunities for optimization of this flow, right? That's when people have that aha moment. Wow, we could be so much faster. We could go from 18 months to 3 months if we really take an in-depth look at this and start working together. So, so this concept of flow, which is something that comes from Lean, initially from manufacturing, but how applicable is that to I'm not talking about the process of manufacturing here, but to the digital process.
But I think it carries over. Like that process is ingrained in our company, and just because it's really relevant in manufacturing, and like carrying it over to everything we do, from like marketing strategies to digital property creation, is really important. And it's like, our company motto internally is like, if you can't measure it, you can't improve, right? So like providing visibility, transparency. I know we talked earlier, it's like, don't be married to KPIs, but like create measurement, create measuring sticks, and like understand where you are today and like where you need to be.
And then how do you follow through? Because you have those metrics, okay, they're there somewhere, perhaps some dashboard. I don't know.
We drive you guys harder.
So,
no, it really depends on what the KPIs that you're measuring, right? So like in manufacturing, certain KPIs, maybe somebody optimizes a process, right? For us, it's especially sort of being a digital group within a traditional CPG, it is understanding everything from our centralized execution of the digital property itself to, are we structured as an organization, as AB InBev, both globally and also regionally, are we structured properly? And it is, maybe it's not the process, but maybe it's how we're structured to support the process. So I think like marrying a lot of those things becomes incredibly important when you start to talk about like, okay, now that the KPI has been created, everybody's for the most part in agreement, we know how much we need to improve. Now the question becomes, how do we improve? And everything needs to be on the table. And if people aren't bought in at the high, like from the bottom to top and top to bottom, and there's sacred cows that can't be taken off the table, then man, it's impossible. Like you need to be able to test certain things and say, like we've had this structure in place for 35 years. Cool, get rid of it. Get rid of it in one small city, and let's see. And sometimes that's where we have the biggest breakthroughs.
Yeah. I think it's just you can't be, so to the point about KPIs, it's yes, have them, because you need some baseline metric in which to say this is successful, it's working, or it's not. But you don't want to be so tied to it that if it's failing, or if it's not measuring something that you actually end up valuing anymore, or if it's irrelevant, that you're still holding on to this metric that really doesn't mean anything. And you have to be confident enough to know what you don't know sometimes too, and to say, you know what, this didn't really work, or I don't think we have the information that we need, so we need to scrap this. And I would say another thing that I've noticed is that the best leaders that I've worked for will very confidently say, I don't know the answer to that, and I'm gonna go find it, or we'll find the person who has the answer. And I think a little alarm bell goes off for me when you have someone who always has the answer or is willing to just like freestyle and make one up. That's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah. All right, so I think we can open the mic for questions. If anybody wants to ask something, please feel free to go to the mic at any time. If you don't, I will keep asking questions, okay, because we don't want to stop now. But please. Oh, okay. The mic is there. Yeah. Make your way.
Hello, Dilly. I work on Jason's team, so there's been a lot of good conversation, like back and forth debate, and one of the kind of common themes I think between Bärí and Jason's comments seems to be based on the fact that Bärí's worked in a lot of like modern tech companies. So even eBay and PayPal haven't been around for a long time. are more modern than like ABI at its core. What do you think? How do you think that like plays into a lot of like the differences in how you go about doing this digital stuff at scale?
I think one interesting nuance that I hadn't really paid attention to is the people say, okay, yes, Stubhub, eBay is a tech company and Facebook is, so shouldn't they be similar? And the answer is no. And the reason being is that you're dealing with one organization in which you're working for, the executives are men who have always worked for other people. And then you have a company where the CEO started it in his dorm room. He's never worked for anybody else. And because of that, I think he is a leader who is inclined to say, I don't know the answer to that. I do what I'm good at. And I have all these other people here who I defer to because they're experts in their field. And even they will say, I don't have the answer to that. As Cheryl has said, I don't have the answer to that. We've had all kinds of people say, I don't have the answer. And I think that what that breeds was a culture of empowerment, and it also allowed people the comfortability to fail. If something didn't work, it didn't work. Whereas I would say eBay is yes, it's a tech company, but it's an older feeling tech company. And because it's run by people who've worked in large organizations, it feels almost like a large organization. It doesn't feel necessarily as modern in some respects. That said, I would say that both are very married to the idea of speed. They're very married to the idea of pushing the envelope, which is great. They just have different ways of doing it.
And I would just call out, like, within any traditional company, it's like, man, call BS, by the way. It's like,
Yeah.
it's so often used as an excuse, like, wow, we
Yeah.
weren't born in the digital, we're not digitally
This is how we've always
native,
done
and it's
it.
so much easier for Amazon. It's like, man, BS. Like, there are ways to sort of, innovate, get around, like, move at speed, really scale things very quickly. It's just, again, like, having that culture of, like, people with a lot of energy, willing to sort of disrupt their own process just to get better.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, I'd like to add to that changing behavior is a matter. Changing culture implies in changing behavior, and the best way to change behavior is start doing things differently. Mm-hmm. Instead, before trying to say how we should work. Well, let's do this. Let's always start doing this, right? And with that, with changing the way people work, over time, it changes the way people think, and it changes the values of the company, right? And then all of a sudden, going fast is a value. Allowing people to fail in their experiments becomes a value. But you first start doing things differently, then that will affect the culture. And another aspect of leadership, which is very ingrained in Lean principles, is the idea that the leaders are there, of course, to support their teams, but to ask the tough questions, to help them, to challenge them to find the best solutions instead of, as you mentioned, telling what's the best solution. No, yeah. I'm going to challenge you. I know how to ask questions, and then you find the best answers to that. And I believe that this is fundamental to change the way a company that is large, that has ingrained habits, that's how it's possible to change at scale. Mm-hmm. Let's go for this.
Hi, thanks so much. This is really interesting. And it's amazing to hear that in 10 months you built a drone. And I was just wondering, in terms of being optimized for speed and following the paradigm...
Can you get closer to the mic?
Oh,
please?
sorry, yeah. In terms of being optimized for speed and following the paradigm of failing fast, did you ever, what did you do about rigor? In terms of defining that problem up front, defining those goals, and getting all of that ratified with everybody. Do you still follow that really carefully and rigorously inside of an optimized process and failing fast? Or do you ever sometimes actually let go of that a little bit because you know you're going to fail fast? Is there
I think yes and no. I am probably, lawyers are type A people, right? Who am I fooling? So I think to a certain extent, yes, I have a pretty clear process of how I like to do things. I always start every client meeting, and when I was at Stubhub, I worked in ops, but I still kind of kept the same mindset as being an attorney, and I would start every meeting like, what is the goal? What are we trying to do? And for me, my mind works to what is the big picture thing that we're trying to do, and then I like to back into it. It's almost like a puzzle piece, and for me, that's the fun part. But one thing I did learn at Facebook is that you cannot be married to a process. Things just change too fast. Priorities change too quickly. And so you can have a framework for it, but you also have to be nimble enough to allow that to bend and take different shapes if it needs to. So as long as you have an outline in terms of how you're going to work, it's fine.
Thank you.
Hey guys. So great talk, by the way. I saw Blind Spotting last night, which is a dope flick, and I was wondering, what do you guys take from your personal life that you kind of bring into this process, whether it's activism or parenting or whatever those things are, and then or vice versa from your professional life into your personal life?
Oh man. My college graduation speaker implored us to be Trojan Horses. And so I kind of take that spirit with me everywhere I go. Just based off of who and what I am, I feel like a lot of different things come into a room when I walk in it. And I'm usually not what people expect when you say your head of operations is here or your IP counsel. So I kind of like that. It also gives me the ability to think through different use cases for products, which people may not think of or wouldn't be intuitive to them. And also, my mom raised me I could not say that I had a problem with something unless I also had a solution to give her when I raised the problem. And so I actually not only raise my kids that way, but I treat my coworkers that way. And it's like, if you want to say, yeah, this sucks, it's like, okay, well, it sucks, but so what do you want to do? Like, you can't just say it sucks. If you don't like it, that's fine, but what's the alternative? And so people that, we get into a working rapport, they understand that I'm going to come to them with a proposed solution or if I'm going to change something and vice versa.
Yeah, I'd say you have to have like a life outside of work because it gives you perspective. Mm-hmm. Like I have 2 kids and my 3.5-year-old daughter has like sort of the perspective on life that like I aspire to, and then I bring that to the office. You know what I mean? So it's like, but if I was in the office all day and like, and you don't unplug, you have no perspective in terms of like what you're trying to achieve and why. And so always come back to that and say like, man, like ultimately like, yes, we have this dream professionally, like we're trying to achieve it for a certain reason, but then like how you go about doing that, like there's, I'm from the quantum mechanics point of view, it's like there's an infinite amount of solutions or ways to get there or routes to get there. And you can't stick to just one, and like so come with that enthusiasm, with sort of like that, a different mindset every day in terms of like, are you thinking the right way about a problem?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I'll give the quick I work at AB InBev disclaimer as well. Philly. One of the conversations that comes up a lot when we talk about speed is the sort of push-pull between centralization and democratization within organizations. I was hoping you guys could talk a little bit about how that's come into play in your careers.
Yeah, I think in terms of, first of all, I think there's always, especially in like a fragmented or a global organization, there's always push to localize. I don't even want to say democratize, localize. And I think first, making that differentiation is really important because it's not that there shouldn't be empowerment in Argentina, there shouldn't be empowerment in Brazil or in Europe or China. It's that, look, things can be, there are some things that should be centralized, there are some things that should be democratized, and regions or localities should be empowered. But then what, if anything, should really be local? And I think making that distinction is really important because if you don't, you'll get a lot of pushback just being like, you want to take this from me, yep, and you don't know what you're doing. I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah, or you're missing, there may be certain cultural nuances that are not regulatory in nature, but they're customary. And if you are not native of that that location, you're going to miss that nuance, and that could be something that could be offensive. It could be bad for business. You never really know. But yeah, I would say that decentralized procurement was kind of the bane of my existence sometimes. Particularly because I started the supplier diversity program at Facebook as well, and trying to kind of herd cats to get that going was hard because everybody can buy anything at any time, anywhere, to a certain amount. So kind of figuring out how to handle that was interesting.
I'll just add one aspect, which is understanding the whole cycle, the whole value stream, and the interactions that happen in there, because this centralization, decentralization doesn't happen only in terms of countries and regions.
Right.
There's also, in a large bank, there is the core system, and that's going to be something that is going to be handled by a central organization. This is not going to be distributed, and everybody is going to interact with those, with that group and that system. So, and same happens in every single other organization. So some things are distributed, some things are centralized, but there's always an interaction between groups and parts. And you need to understand this because it's learning to see. Right? It's another common phrase in the Lean vernacular, because if you only see your own silo, you may be optimized for whatever you do. But when you look the whole picture, then there's so many inefficiencies. And the speed, what happens is that so often companies and people think that speed comes from working harder, right? So if we need to finish something in the next couple of months, let's put a lot of people working on this like crazy during the weekends, overtime, and we're going to get this done. So it's task force, right? So companies start task force. And when you talk about speed in terms of Lean, we're talking about understanding the whole flow, and speed will come from consistency and from having a smoother flow between these parts and eliminating waste. So it's not that we're going to be faster in the next couple of months. We're going to be faster in the long term. And that's where you win the game. It's not being faster in one project in the next couple of months. It's by being consistently faster than the competition, because you learned how to see the whole process, the value stream, and then you're able to optimize that flow without the burden, putting the burden of that in the people who are working in a particular initiative, but just having a better process, a better flow. That's where the speed comes from.
Thanks.
Hi. So my question is about speed and when speed is not a good thing, in the sense that oftentimes we give up quality for speed. And I think that often comes from being pushed from the top down to deliver on a timeline. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you balance that desire to hit a deadline, do something fast, with actually rolling something out that achieves the initial problem?
Yeah, I think first I think it's important to always sort of keep your eye on the prize. Like, what are we trying to do, right? From our perspective, it's like we're trying to delight our customer, provide a better service level, do all these things. I think part of that path and that journey might be like an imperfect product or an imperfect sort of deliverable. I think there's a lot, especially in larger organizations, there's then a lot of pressure to, okay, take that and scale it. Like, bring it, you did that in one city in the United States, let's put it all over the world in the next 2 days. And it's like consistently going back and having the organization understand like what it then takes to go from, one small pilot all the way up to, a scalable or sustainable product in the world is really important. And I think it's all about like transparency, and again, like that open dialogue of communication around, no. The focus isn't getting this out as quickly as possible. The focus is providing the best service to our customer. And by waiting, we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes my example of all of this would probably be when I've seen the worst case scenario happen with legal, where you are circumventing something because you're just trying to get something out as quickly as possible, but you have not paid attention to any of the rules or regulatory issues around a product. And that can bankrupt you. So you want to be very careful when you do things like that. I typically advise people if you have to ship a product, no one's going to have perfect information all the time, but you want to make the most informed decision you can make with the information you have at the time. And sometimes that means that you have to kill a project, and sometimes that means you roll the dice and you do it anyway. But again, I would say that should be a pilot and not something that you're going to scale globally. And anything that you are going to scale globally, you should probably start with the most strict jurisdiction that you're going to enter and then loosen the ties. It's very, very hard to do it the opposite way. It costs more money and more time, and you end up being slower in the long run.
Right. With that, I'd like to thank you all and thank our panelists for closing the Lean Digital Speedway in a very positive note.
All right. Good.
And I guess we have some booze over there from a very famous company.